ESPN broadcast of Science Matters. The topic for today is a distinct Fusobacterium nucleatum clade dominates the colorectal cancer niche. Now, this study is very big one, lots of things going on in it. And it, like a number of other recent studies, is showing that a bacterium commonly found in the mouth is able to travel to the gut and grow within colorectal cancer tumors. Very interesting. Dr. Gonshor, please.
Well, thanks, Reed. In each of these sessions, as we always say, we take a deep dive into recent research that brings to light objective scientific evidence on the topic at hand. And today, we're going to look at a distinct Fusobacterium Nucleatum clade that dominates the colorectal cancer niche. And this study is very important because the results suggest that a particular lineage or clade of oral bacterial subspecies is driving cancer progression, and it's leading to poorer patient outcomes after cancer treatment. So, with that in mind, let's look at the actual evidence because Reed.
Science matters. Now, after our last broadcast, which was titled Blood Pressure Effects of Sodium Reduction, there were some great questions that came to our attention. And one of those, Dr. Gonshor, was other than salt intake, what other important determinants of high blood pressure, also known as hypertension?
Well, I think everybody is aware of many of these. There are a number of factors that are important in the control of blood pressure, and most of these are modifiable, and that's good because if you can modify it, you can get a change in the risk factors. And these include unhealthy diets, and the last time around we discussed the processed foods, etc. You know, one needs to be very cognizant of some of the things that are out there that we do that really are hurting us. Uh, Excessive salt consumption, which we discussed in the last session. A diet that's high in saturated fat and trans fats. Again, very well aware of this. Low intake of fruits and vegetables. Physical inactivity, plays a significant role, as does the consumption of tobacco and alcohol, as well as being overweight or obese. One's emotional state is important, exercise and sleep, also very significant risk factors. And let me state that we all are very aware that in North America, and I'm in Canada, by the way, but in North America, we are no different. We've got the same issues. We are literally killing ourselves with what we are doing in many cases. Overweight, 70% of the population, people who are morbidly obese, notwithstanding Ozempic and Schmempic. I mean, I get it, but we need to do something that is going to decrease what is really beginning to cause major problems for so many people. And one last point about this. I am aware, it's easy to say, but I'm very aware that there are many people in our societies who live in what's called food deserts. And food deserts are areas where they're living mostly in big cities and even in some rural areas, where in spite of the fact that they go out and try to look for nutritious foods, etc., there are no outlets for them to get a lot of that. Now, one can say, what are you talking about? Everybody can get nutritious foods. Sure, you want to look long enough. I'm not even discussing the price. It's not that simple. So it becomes a socio-economic problem, and we're not here to discuss socio-economic problems, but I think it really invades this kind of discussion, and we need to do something about it. That's my last comment on that.
Agreed, Dr. Gunshore, and we are doing something about it. We're helping people to make some of these decisions.
Absolutely.
And I've said it many times, we help people live themselves out of the problems they've lived themselves into.
True.
So this is something we can take control of, including, and I was very happy to hear you mention the emotional state, exercise, sleep. And this is something that we can help people control. So fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. That was a good one. They're important to all of us as we learn together. And Dr. Gonshor, let's jump into today's study about a distinct Fusobacterium nucleum clade dominating the colorectal cancer niche.
Well, thank you, Reed. And this is really a fascinating study. Can you all see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, you've just mentioned it, distinct. I'm not going to repeat it. I think it'll be the fifth time we repeated it today.
Hmm.
In this particular study, which came out, as you can see, it was accepted and came out in 20th of March. So it was literally a number of weeks ago. What they found, and we'll go through the details of this, the C2 subgroup of Fusobacterium nucleatum, FN, a bacterium in the human oral cavity, drives the reported FN enrichment in human colorectal cancer and reveals the genetic underpinnings of the pathoadaptation of FNAC2, this subgroup, in this colorectal cancer niche. That's a lot to say. Let's see what that really means. Well, remember, the last time I looked, the oral cavity was a part of the body, and we tend to forget that. Oral bacteria can invade the intestines, causing imbalances in the intestinal microecology, and it can affect organs of the digestive system. We know that adults create well over 1,000 milliliters of saliva a day. That's an awful lot. Almost all of which enters the gut, right? It enters the GI tract. So virulent oral strains migrate to the intestine through the GI tract or even the blood, and it causes imbalances in the intestinal microecology. And it can affect organs of the GI system and even beyond. We're not even going to get into that today. And so we do know what oral microbiota can do in the human systemic diseases. And remember, if you've got periodontal disease, that's gum disease, those bacteria are moving down not just in the oral cavity, they're down into the rest of the body, specifically the GI tract. And today we're going to be going over Fusobacterium. There are a whole number of others, Streptococcus, Porphyromonas, you name it. But we're going to discuss Fuso today. And remember that it can cause any number of different problems, or it can exacerbate problems that are already there. And today we're going to be looking at the cancer effect. But remember, it can cause many other issues or make many other issues worse. And so we need to be cognizant of that fact. Now, Fusobacterium nucleatum, FN, is a bacterium present in the human oral cavity. It's very well known, but it's rarely found in the lower GI tract of healthy individuals. But it is enriched in human colorectal cancers. Interesting. So what you find in those cancers, in the intratumoral, meaning within the cancer, you're going to find high loads of FN, of that bacteria. And it is associated with, when you see it in high amounts, it's associated with recurrence. I'm talking about the tumor, metastases, not good, and ultimately poor patient prognosis. So this study delineated the various FN genetic factors that are facilitating this colonization of this bacterium in the tumor. And so they were able to generate a whole number of genomes of 135 FN strains, 80 oral strains from individuals without cancer, 55 unique strains for those with cancer. And they cultured all of this. And when they did the pangenomic analysis, in other words, you look at an analysis of all of the genes of all of these different strains, they identified 483 colorectal cancer enriched genetic factors. It's quite something. Tumor isolated strains were predominantly belonging to a subspecies of Fusobacterium, a subspecies. We're calling it FNA. And it gets even more interesting. So, number one, just to show you, because there are many graphs that they did a tremendous amount of work. And they showed that of all of the different strains within the Fusobacterium, there was that one particular group, the FNAC2 species or subspecies strains, were shown to seed colorectal cancer tumors. And it was quite interesting because the rest of them, almost nothing. And then you got to this particular C2 species and things went wrong. So the predominant group of Fuso in the colorectal cancer tumors are thought to be a single subspecies. And it's actually composed of two distinct lineages, this subspecies, FNAC1 and FNAC2. So think about it. We're going down from Fuso, a number of subspecies. Within that subspecies, there is one clade or lineage that has two subspecies within that subspecies. And one of them is FNAC2. And by separating out the genetic differences between these clades, they found that the tumor infiltrating FNAC2 type had acquired distinct genetic traits that allowed it to do what? To travel from the mouth through to the stomach, withstand stomach acid, and then grow in the lower GI tract. That's quite something. They compared tumor tissue with healthy tissue from patients with colorectal cancer. Only this subtype, you can say, FNAC2, is significantly enriched in colorectal cancer tumor tissue, and it is the only one responsible for colorectal cancer growth. So overall, the results demonstrate the ability of FNAC2, not even FNAC1, only C2, to metabolically affect the intestinal milieu, the region of that colon that led towards pro-oncogenic conditions, meaning conditions that lead towards cancer development. What are the key takeaways then? A specific subtype of the Fusobacterium nucleatum, FN microbe, is responsible for tumor growth. And what is it? The FNAC2. And that particular FNAC2 type has acquired distinct genetic traits that enable it to enrich CRC tumor tissue. And it's responsible for, or partially responsible for CRC growth. The results suggest that the therapeutics and screening that target this subgroup within the microbiota would help people who are at higher risk for more aggressive colorectal cancer. Imagine you're able to find the FNAC2, decrease it, and that clearly will decrease the ability of these aggressive colorectal cancers to invigorate themselves and become metastatic. That's quite something. Thank you for listening to this Science Matters.
Good episode, Dr. Gonshor. And, you know, we have known for a long time that oral bacteria causes problems. And now you're seeing it right in these scientific studies. This is a good example of why we do Science Matters, this particular show, because the studies are very complex. That was a monster, you know, actually pretty tough for me to get through. And you make it so simple. So thank you for that. That's why we're here. And it's just wonderful. So I want to thank you guys. Remember, I know you're going to have questions about that. So submit those to fdntraining.com/ well, you could submit them to /studies, And join us again in 2 weeks on June 24th. Remember that it's very important you subscribe, like, and share if you enjoyed this episode. And in just another 2 weeks, we're going to talk about minimal amount of exercise to prolong life. And your turn. Why, Dr. Gonshor?
Because science matters.